I used to think silence was just background noise, the sound of a quiet room, a pause between sentences. But for me, silence was the loudest part of my childhood. It followed me everywhere. It lived in every moment my parents forgot to look my way. I'm 30 now. I live alone in a modest apartment in Portland, Oregon. It's tucked behind an old bookstore with creaky floors and windows that fog in the winter. On most days, it feels peaceful. But on days like today, when the light slips through the blinds just right and the air smells like tea leaves and rain, the past starts to hum again. I was never the favorite. That role always belonged to Emily. She's 3 years younger than me, and from the moment she could speak in full sentences, it was like the world around us shifted to match her needs. I still remember my 7th birthday. My mom brought home a small cake in a plastic container from the grocery store. She lit exactly 7 candles and told me to make a wish. No decorations, no friends, no music. Just me, my parents, and their old camera. I smiled for the picture, but even then, I knew something was missing. The memory that hurts the most came a few years later when Emily turned 4. That party looked like a fairy tale. There was a bounce house in the backyard, a cotton candy machine, even a woman dressed as Cinderella who sang songs and handed out tiaras to all the neighborhood girls. I had stood at the edge of the lawn, watching through the kitchen window. I asked my mom why I never had a party like that. She just laughed and said, "You're older now, you don't need those things." But I did. I really did. Growing up, Emily was the sun. I was just somewhere in the background orbiting quietly, doing everything I could to stay visible. I didn't blame her. She was sweet and charming, always bouncing around with big ideas and bigger emotions. She cried easily. She smiled often. She was the kind of kid adults adored. Me? I learned early that if I wanted something, I had to earn it. I saved my allowance for months to buy the rollerblades I had been dreaming about. The day I brought them home, I couldn't wait to try them out. But the moment Emily saw them, she cried. Loud, dramatic tears. By the end of the day, my parents had driven to the store and bought her a pair that cost twice as much. When I asked why, my mom said, "Because you're the big sister. You're supposed to give in." That became a kind of pattern in our house. I gave in, I stayed quiet. I smiled when it hurt. I didn't want to cause trouble. I thought if I just kept being good, being responsible, one day they'd turn to me and say, "We see you. We're proud of you." But that moment never really came. Sometimes I wonder what my life might have looked like if I hadn't tried so hard to be perfect, if I hadn't built my identity around pleasing people who didn't even notice I was trying. Maybe I would have been louder, maybe I would have left sooner. These thoughts visit me often, especially when I'm alone like this. The kettle's still warm, my tea is steeping. Outside, the world feels like it's moving forward, but I'm still here, remembering the silence that raised me. I don't think I ever stopped trying to earn love. Even now, with my own job, my own apartment, a life far from the place I used to call home, I still catch myself wondering if they'd be proud of me, if they'd ever think to call, or ask how I'm doing. The truth is, I don't think they will. Not because they don't care, but because they never learned how to see me outside of what I could do for them. I sip my tea and watch the steam curl up toward the ceiling. It's quiet here. But this silence is different. It's not cold, not punishing. It's the kind that lets you breathe, the kind that waits without asking anything in return. And for now, that's enough. Maybe healing doesn't come in a single moment. Maybe it starts in small spaces like this, in the warmth of a mug between your hands, in the memory of a little girl who just wanted to be seen. I close my eyes and listen. The past is still there, but so am I. And this time, I'm not trying to disappear. My parents' names are Brenda and Carl. On paper, they were ordinary. Dad worked long hours in logistics. Mom stayed home most of my childhood, managing the house and later picking up part-time work at a floral shop. From the outside, we looked like a well-functioning family. Neat lawn, holiday cards, Sunday dinners. But inside, the air always leaned a little heavier in my direction. Emily was their golden girl. From the time she was old enough to speak in full sentences, it was clear she had them wrapped around her little finger. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I say it with tired honesty. Some kids are cherished just for showing up. Others have to prove themselves over and over again just to be tolerated. I was the second kind. Every time Emily got a gold star or brought home a crayon drawing from school, it went on the fridge. Mom would make a big deal out of it. Dad would ruffle her hair and say things like, "You're going to be famous one day." When I made the honor roll for the third time in a row, I got a nod. Maybe a quiet good job if they remembered. In 7th grade, I joined the volleyball team. I wasn't the best player at first, but I practiced every afternoon until I made team captain. At our final game, I scanned the bleachers for my family. I had told them about it weeks in advance, but the stands were empty on our side. Later that night, my mom called and said Emily had a stomach ache. They had to stay home. I remember standing there with my team jersey still on, the lights in the gym flickering as the custodian swept the floor. I hung up the phone and didn't say a word. That was the moment something inside me stopped expecting anything. Emily could spill juice on the carpet and it would be a funny story. I once forgot to bring in the mail for 2 days and got a full lecture about responsibility and respect. I don't think Emily meant to take up all the air in the room. She just existed in a way that made others want to take care of her. I existed in a way that made others believe I could take care of myself. So I did. I cleaned the kitchen without being asked. I watched Emily while our parents went out. I helped her with homework, even when I had my own to finish. And when I did speak up, when I asked why it always had to be me, Mom would say something like, "Because you're the strong one." That always sounded like a compliment, but it never felt like one. Strength in our house meant silence. It meant swallowing the hard parts and smiling through them. By the time I got to high school, I had a strategy. Stay busy, stay out of the way, rack up achievements like armor. If I couldn't be loved for who I was, maybe I could be admired for what I did. I joined the debate team, took on extra credit projects, woke up early to study before school, and stayed late to help teachers with classroom prep. It wasn't because I loved being overcommitted. It was because it was the only way I felt real. Every once in a while, I'd let myself believe that one more award, one more scholarship, one more perfect report card might shift something, that maybe this time they'd really see me. But recognition never came. I remember getting accepted into a competitive summer program for gifted students. Only 12 kids from the entire state were selected. I printed the acceptance letter and left it on the kitchen table. That evening, after dinner, Dad glanced at it and said, "Just make sure you still help around the house before you go." No one asked what the program was about. No one said congratulations. Emily, meanwhile, got a B- on a math quiz and was treated to dinner out. Mom said math was always hard for girls and that she was proud of her effort. I never said anything, not out loud. Instead, I let it stack up inside me. Little scenes like that, quiet dismissals, shrugged off accomplishments. After a while, it became normal, like background noise you forget to question. But it left a mark. Not just the sadness, but a kind of erosion, a slow belief forming inside me that I only mattered if I performed, if I excelled. That love was something you could lose if you didn't meet expectations. It took me years to realize how dangerous that idea was. Now, when I look back, I don't think my parents hated me. I think they just got comfortable with the version of me that never needed them, the version that made their life easier. And that version became my mask. I learned how to show up with answers, how to offer help before anyone asked, how to anticipate needs. It made me reliable, capable, admired by teachers and friends. But I was so tired. Tired of being the one who didn't get to fall apart. Tired of being the one who was told, "You're just more mature," or "You're built different," like it was something to be proud of when it really just meant I had no other choice. These days, I try not to live in the past, but it visits sometimes in quiet waves, in the way I hesitate to ask for help, in the way I still flinch a little when someone compliments me, like it must be a mistake. Maybe that's what survival looks like when you grow up being the reliable one. You forget what it feels like to simply be seen without having to prove anything. I found out about Grandpa's passing on a rainy morning in early spring. My Aunt Margaret called just after 7. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, like she didn't want to deliver the news. "He passed in his sleep," she said. "Peaceful. Quiet." I stood in my kitchen holding the phone, staring out the window as the clouds spilled over the rooftops. I had known this moment would come. His health had been fading for years, but knowing doesn't prepare you. I thought I'd have more time. Just one more call, one more visit. Grandpa was the only person in our family who ever made me feel seen. When I was accepted into college, he didn't say congratulations. He looked me in the eyes and said, "I've always known you were going to do something remarkable." That sentence stayed with me for years. I wrote it in the margins of notebooks. I whispered it to myself in dark moments. It reminded me that I mattered, even when no one else said so. The funeral was small and awkward. Family flew in, mostly out of obligation. People hugged like strangers. The air felt tight. I arrived early and stood alone in front of his photo. Emily hovered near our parents, wiping her eyes. I couldn't tell if the tears were grief or something else. I didn't ask. A week later, we were invited to a lawyer's office for the reading of the will. The room was cold, lined with old books and framed certificates. Aunt Margaret sat on one side, my parents on the other. Emily next to them, quiet. I took a seat near the window, my hands folded in my lap. Mr. Halbrook, Grandpa's longtime attorney, cleared his throat and began reading. All personal assets, including property, investments, and savings, are to be divided equally among my 3 grandchildren, Lauren James, Emily James, and Joshua Kent. I froze. The total value to be divided, he continued, is approximately $1.5 million. Each of you will receive $500,000. There was silence. I didn't look at anyone. I just stared at the grain of the table and tried to process what I had heard. Grandpa had remembered me, not as an afterthought, not as a side note, as an equal. It was the first time in my life I had ever received something without having to prove I deserved it. But the feeling didn't last long. That evening, after I got home, I received a text from my mother. "Are you free? Dad and I want to stop by and talk." 15 minutes later, they arrived. I made tea like I always did, the same teapot Grandpa once gave me, the same quiet routine. We sat in the living room and my father spoke first. "Lauren, your mother and I have been thinking. We believe it would be fairer if you gave your portion to Emily." I blinked. "She's going through a rough time," he continued. "She's only working part-time. She just got out of a breakup. You have a stable job. You have your own place." I looked at my mom. She didn't meet my eyes. She just fiddled with her bracelet and said softly, "You're doing well. She has nothing." My voice came out calm but cold. "That's Grandpa's money. He made the decision. I didn't ask for it." Mom sighed. "You're being selfish, Lauren. If he knew how hard things have been for Emily, he would have wanted you to share." I stood up. I could feel my hands trembling. If Grandpa wanted Emily to have everything, he would have said so. This was his decision. Not mine, not yours. My dad's tone shifted. Hard. He leaned forward and said, "Do you not remember who raised you? Who paid for your school lunches? Who kept the lights on? You think you earned everything by yourself?" I didn't respond right away. I let the words hang in the air. When I finally spoke, my voice was quiet but steady. I remember starting work at 16. I remember paying for my own textbooks. I remember learning to drive in a parking lot because no one had time to teach me. And I remember never being told I was enough, no matter how hard I tried. Dad's face darkened. "If you keep that money," he said, "don't expect to set foot in this house again." I let out a soft laugh. There was no joy in it. "Then maybe," I said, "it's time I stopped trying to." They left soon after. I stood by the window for a long time after the door closed. The room smelled like tea gone cold. My fingers curled around the edge of the counter. For years, I had been trying to find a way back into a family that only wanted me quiet, obedient, and giving. But now I had something they couldn't control. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't giving it away. 3 days after our last conversation, I received an email from the law office handling my grandfather's estate. The subject line stopped me cold. "Temporary petition filed for executive review." I clicked it with shaking hands. My father had submitted a legal claim to challenge the distribution of the will. His argument was that Grandpa had shown signs of diminished mental capacity in the months before his passing. He was asking the court to pause any financial transfers until the issue could be reviewed. It didn't even surprise me. What shocked me was how calm I felt. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the words over and over. Then I reached for my phone and called my grandmother. Eleanor answered on the second ring. Her voice was steady but low. "I know, Lauren. I saw the filing this morning." I didn't ask her how she knew. I just sat there, quiet, listening to the way her breath moved through the line. "Can you come over this afternoon?" she said. "I have something you need to see." Her house was 2 hours away in Spokane, a red brick place with ivy on the porch rails. I had always loved visiting her when I was younger. It was the only place that ever felt safe. When I arrived, she opened the door without a word and led me to the kitchen. It looked the same as always. Lace curtains, old recipe cards in a wooden box, a ceramic teapot that matched the one she once gave me. She pulled a thick folder from the drawer beside the fridge and placed it in front of me. "Your grandfather saw this coming," she said, "and he prepared for it." Inside were copies of the final will, notarized and stamped, audio recordings from the amendment meeting, handwritten notes, and something else. A clause added at the end. "Any beneficiary who challenges the will or attempts to alter its distribution shall forfeit their inheritance in full." I stared at the sentence, reading it over and over. I felt something stir in my chest. Not relief exactly, something deeper. A feeling I didn't have a name for yet. Grandpa knew. He knew my father might try to rewrite the story, and he made sure he couldn't. Eleanor sat down across from me and placed her hand on mine. "He loved you, Lauren, not for what you achieved, just for who you are. He told me once that no grandchild should ever feel like they had to compete to be loved." I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My throat was tight, my eyes burned. "He watched you all those years," she said. "He saw how hard you worked, how quietly you carried everything." I looked through the folder again. Every detail was careful, every piece of documentation solid. Then she handed me a small USB. "This has the audio file of the amendment meeting, and his recorded statement explaining why he added the clause." I took it with both hands, holding it like it was something sacred. "Thank you," I whispered. "You don't need to fight them alone," she said. "He made sure of that." That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed with the folder open beside me, playing the audio through my laptop. It was his voice, steady and clear. "I want this divided equally, not because it's neat or easy, but because it's right. If anyone tries to undo this, they don't deserve to hold the power I've left behind." Hearing those words from him, even after he was gone, felt like someone reaching through the dark and placing a hand on my shoulder. For the first time, I wasn't the one asking to be heard. I was the one holding the truth. And this time, I wasn't letting go of it. It was late when the phone rang, just past 10. I almost didn't answer, but something in my chest told me I should. Emily's name flashed across the screen. I picked up and waited. For a second, there was only silence. Then her voice came through, thin and shaky. "Lauren, I don't know who to talk to." I sat down slowly, grounding myself. Her voice cracked like she was trying not to cry. "They asked me to sign something. Papers. They said it would just make things easier, that putting my share in Mom's name would help with taxes." She paused. "I told them no, and Mom said if I couldn't trust them, then I must not be part of this family anymore." My hand tightened around the phone. I waited a beat before speaking. "What did Dad say?" She let out a slow breath. "He said I was being dramatic, that I've always needed help making decisions, that I should stop letting other people influence me." Other people. She meant me. I leaned back, pressing my head against the wall. "You didn't sign anything, right?" "No," she said quickly. "I couldn't. I mean, something about it just felt wrong." Another pause. "I think they're mad at me, Lauren, like really mad. I don't know what to do." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. We had never talked like this, not with honesty, not with fear in her voice. I heard myself say, "You did the right thing." She was quiet for a long time, then she spoke again, softer. "Do you think they ever loved us the same?" I didn't answer right away. Growing up, I always saw you as the favorite, I said, but maybe that wasn't the whole story. She sniffled. I think I was just easier for them to manage. I never asked questions. I did what they wanted. I believed what they told me. That sounds a lot like control, I said gently. She let that sink in. I always thought you were just cold, she whispered. Distant. But now I get it. You were surviving. There was a long silence between us, but this one didn't feel heavy. I imagined her in her apartment, alone, trying to make sense of it all, trying to stand on legs that had never been trusted to hold her weight. She finally said, I don't want to be like them. You don't have to be, I said. I heard her exhale, slow and careful, like someone letting go of something they had carried too long. I think I'm starting to see what you've been living with all these years, she said, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. You couldn't have, I told her. They made sure of that. She didn't argue. We stayed on the phone for another hour, talking not as competitors or opposites, but as sisters trying to untangle the same web from different angles. When we finally hung up, I sat there staring at the dark ceiling. It didn't feel like resolution, not yet. But it felt like the beginning of something honest. And that was more than we had ever had. The first thing I did was pay off my student loans. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No champagne, no celebration. Just a quiet click on a banking app and a confirmation message. But when I saw the balance drop to zero, something shifted inside me, like I had just placed down a backpack I didn't know I had been carrying for years. That weekend, I started rearranging my apartment, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I finally had the space to ask myself what I needed. I replaced the old couch with a soft green one that curved perfectly into the corner by the window. I added a shelf of small plants, lavender, mint, a peace lily that reminded me to breathe. I painted the walls a warm ivory, opened the blinds wider, and brought in a second-hand reading chair I found at a thrift store. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like me. I began to build something that wasn't just a place to sleep, but a place to rest. Really rest. A space that told me every morning that I didn't have to earn comfort. I was allowed to have it. Emily called often. Every Wednesday night after her evening class, she'd update me on what she was learning. She had enrolled at the local community college, studying social work. I helped her pay for her first semester, but she insisted on covering the next with her own savings. That meant something to her. And to me. She was serious about it. I saw it in her eyes, in the way her voice steadied when she spoke about class projects. She had a long way to go, but she was walking in a direction she had chosen for herself. I started walking too. There was a workshop offered downtown on the basics of trauma-informed counseling. I signed up without overthinking it. Something about it felt right. Every Tuesday and Friday evening, I sat in a room with people who were starting over. Some were retired teachers. Others were in recovery. There was even a woman who had spent 20 years in corporate sales before deciding she wanted to help teenagers find their voice. We were all carrying stories. That room felt honest. Nobody asked for resumes. Nobody cared about titles. We listened to each other, learned how to hold space, learned how to ask the kind of questions that opened doors, not wounds. On weekends, I started volunteering at a youth center that supported teens who had been through emotional abuse or unstable homes. I didn't do much at first, helped with snack prep, sat in on journaling sessions, but eventually I started leading small groups. We talked about boundaries, about trust, about how to recognize when love comes with strings attached. One girl, maybe 15, looked at me one afternoon and said, "You don't talk like the other adults. You don't make us feel like we're broken." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and said, "That's because you're not. You're just learning how to feel safe again." I think I needed to hear that as much as she did. Not everything was smooth. There were days I still felt the weight of my family's silence. Holidays came and went without calls. I wasn't invited to Thanksgiving. A cousin unfollowed me on social media. There were whispers, rumors, emails that felt like accusations dressed in polite words. But those things didn't sting the way they used to. Because I was finally building something of my own, not just a home, but a purpose. A way of existing that didn't require me to shrink. Every time I stood in that classroom or sat beside a teenager trying to untangle their past, I felt steadier, not fixed, not finished, but real. I was no longer just surviving. I was healing, in the open, on my own terms, and for the first time, I wasn't doing it alone. We called it New Arms. The name came to me during a quiet morning walk around Green Lake. I had been thinking about what it meant to build something from scratch, not a business or a project, but a space. A space for people like us, people who grew up waiting for a kind word that never came, who learned to tiptoe around disappointment, who carried questions they were never allowed to ask. Emily loved the name right away. She said it felt like what we had both been looking for, a different kind of family, one that reached out, one that welcomed instead of demanded. Every Sunday, we walked the trail around the lake together. At first, it was just for the routine, something to keep us connected. But over time, it became our anchor, a way to check in without forcing anything. Some days we talked the whole time. Other days we barely spoke at all, and that was enough. New Arms started small, a rented room in a local community center, a couple of folding chairs, a pot of coffee on a scratched-up table. We didn't advertise, just put up a flyer on the library bulletin board. Word spread slowly. The people who came weren't strangers for long. There was a woman in her 50s who said she was still afraid of her mother's voice, even though they hadn't spoken in years. A college student who admitted he never applied for art school because his dad said it was a waste of time. A man who had spent most of his life trying to fix his siblings' problems, only to realize he had never once asked what he needed. We listened. We didn't give advice unless someone asked. We shared when it felt right. We didn't pretend to be experts. We were just people who understood how heavy silence can be. Emily started facilitating sessions too. She was nervous at first, but I saw something new in her, a steadiness, a quiet confidence she never had when she was trying to live up to our parents' picture of who she should be. One night, after a session, she turned to me and said, "I used to think I was strong because I followed the rules, but now I think strength is something else. It's choosing to unlearn them." I nodded. I knew exactly what she meant. We still heard from our parents from time to time, emails that sounded polite on the surface but always circled back to disappointment, accusations dressed up as questions. They didn't understand what we were doing. Maybe they never would. But that was okay, because we weren't doing it for them. We were building something different, something better. My apartment had become more than a home. It was where we hosted planning nights, where we laughed over takeout, where Emily once cried quietly after a tough session and let me hold her hand without pulling away. Sometimes I caught myself smiling for no reason, not because life was perfect, but because for the first time, I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I had chosen myself. New Arms wasn't just a group. It was a reminder that we didn't have to stay stuck in the stories we were handed. We could write new ones, together. And in those quiet walks, in those shared rooms, in the gentle weight of being believed, I finally found a kind of peace I never knew I needed. Not loud, not dramatic. Just real. And lasting. Lauren's story is a quiet but powerful reminder that healing does not always come from being recognized. Sometimes it begins when you stop trying to earn love and start choosing yourself. She grew up in the shadow of favoritism, her voice often silenced, her efforts dismissed. But through pain and perseverance, she found clarity, peace, and purpose. By letting go of the need for her parents' approval, she created a life rooted in truth and connection, not obligation. Her journey shows us that strength does not have to be loud. It can live in the way you hold your boundaries, build community, and choose to heal on your own terms. If you have ever felt unseen, know that your worth is not up for debate. You are allowed to take up space. If this story spoke to you, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more real stories about family, resilience, and finding your voice.